Hello, skis. This is your King Ginger, an acquaintance, coworker, a lover of rabbits. This morning there was a rabbit and a baby rabbit and a baby squirrel playing in my backyard today, and I almost lost my goddamn mind.
Oh my god!
They do all the time. It's the most adorable thing I've ever seen.
That's not fair. That's not fair.
Are these guys fighting? And then I was like, oh no, they're just playing, and this is amazing.
You should come hang out in my yard at some point, because like there has been a running joke for years that I'm actually a Disney princess, because animals just come to me. Like I had a friend over 2 weeks ago and we're just hanging out in the backyard, like random cat. Who's that random cat? I don't know.
It's random mine cat. Now.
Seriously, like she just hung out with us. She like hopped in my lap and was like all cuddly, and then there was like a bunny, and then like I swear to God, like
yard possession is at least 5/10 of the law, or so I've been told.
I'm really sad that I have not befriended a corvid yet. I'm working on it. The day that I befriend a corvid is the day that like I have ascended into.
If that happens, I'm just going to refer to you as Shannon Hellraven.
I'm here for it. Like, let's go.
What do? I turn into 1,000 ravens. That's what I do.
It's awesome. I'm slowly working my way through my Disney princess arc into my Disney villain arc. I'm getting there slowly.
I think those Disney movies would be way better if we saw that arc.
You know what's funny is like that's my biggest problem with Frozen is that Elsa initially was supposed to be like an antagonist character, and I thought it would have been such a better story. I have so many problems with the first movie. I love the second one. Love the second Frozen movie. It's great.
Well, isn't that every good arc though? It's like, hey, this person was the good guy, or at least thought they were the good guy, and then eventually you're like, oh no, they're the bad guy.
Yes, I've been debating like starting my own show where I just like analyze the living crap out of Disney films.
It'd be good
because like I'm like low key upset. We know this. Anybody who doesn't know this, like my tag on Instagram and all this other stuff is Tangled Adventurer, because I am obsessed with all things Disney. So if you ever want to like delve deep into like Disney lore and animation, like I'm your nerd. So
did I send you that SRD that someone did that's like just the Disney stuff?
No.
Okay, I'll have to make sure I send it to you in Dropbox. It's really well done. Yeah, it's really cool. Because I always thought like, oh, that would be fun to do.
I'm here for that. That'd be dope.
Yeah, you could do a pretty interesting like mini series of like this is a very Disney-esque D&D.
You know what's funny is I think that a lot of the I've thought about doing like a kind of Disney style adventure at some point, but using Tri-Stat system.
Oh yeah. Tri-Stat's a pretty good system.
Tri-Stat's awesome. I was a lot of people don't know this, but when Guardians of Order was first formed back in the day, like when Mark McKinnon started the company and like they got super huge and they were getting all those licenses and stuff, I was one of their demo runners at major cons. So like I own more original Big Eyes Small Mouth books than I want to talk about. I have so many of them, and they're like all signed by Mark and Jesse. I used to run demos for them at Gen Con and Origins and stuff. So I am very deeply familiar with Tri-Stat. Besom will always have a very deep-seated place in my heart, and I love it. And I've used that system for a few different games at this point, because I ran an Outlaw Star campaign that I wrote ages ago that my players broke, one of whom is in this room. Thanks, Rich. Thanks for breaking my plot. My players were super creative, and like they were honestly more creative than I was at the time. So I was like, cool. Awesome.
That's the best though. I love when the players break something and then I just get to go, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. And then we just were off to the races.
I don't know what you're talking about. We never do that down in Outlands ever. Look at Richards. He's like, I have zero idea what you're talking about. BS, sir. You're a liar.
Domains of Dread was the same way, and I still.
Oh my God.
I loved the idea of it. It's like I always love D&D, especially, but any game except for maybe Dread. I love the idea that it's not competitive, but it definitely is like a game of bullshit with people you enjoy bullshitting with, where you give them something and then they take it in a direction you never expected, and then you're forced to go, oh man, so then this happens, and it's like this ever escalating game of just insanity. I thoroughly enjoy that.
I love it. Oh, I love it. And you like I feel bad because like the last 2 games I've played in with you, we are just chaotic as hell.
I love
Like
that. You're kids. You're supposed to be.
I know, but like even in domains, like well, some of us were more chaotic than others. Uh
No
but
comment.
we were no comment. I didn't mean that in a bad way. Like all of us were super chaotic. Like Allie was chaotic in her own right too, but I loved that character. She was so fun to play.
I think the key to it always is like if you give the PCs, the players, a platform to tell their story.
Mhm.
My job, or any good person running any game's job, should be to just continue to give them more hooks and more tools and more knives.
Mhm.
Because if you give me a good knife, I'm going to stab you with it. Um,
And then take it out
yeah,
and then
and
stab you
probably
again.
stab you again. I was telling my niece and nephew about that yesterday, and they were dying.
Savannah is such a fun character to play. Like she's very different for me. Like first off, the fact that she can't talk is hilarious.
I love the whiteboard thing. I feel bad about, like, I'm just gonna be like, oh man, the modulator thing. I have to find a way to like make you roll every time to
You
see
know
if there's a
what?
misfire.
No, if we want to make that like a constant thing of the plot where like she's constantly trying to find a way and it just never happens, I am
I've
fine with
got
that because it's
I've got
hilarious.
something I'm gonna throw at you on one of these Mondays. But I do like the idea of maybe like every time you have to communicate, you have to roll a misfire roll, like just a D6, and then like a 1 and 2 is a misfire and it doesn't work, so you need to spend so long working on it.
I love that. I will totally tell you if you want to like throw something super stupid and challenging at me, make it be like different voices and accents too, and watch me struggle. I'm super down with that. Like that would be freaking hilarious.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm that mean.
No, I'm
Plus, I
inviting
like
you to be that mean.
when somebody has like a voice for their character, or just a certain countenance or tone, or just a way of speaking. Like I feel like, because I don't do voices extremely well, I do a lot of bad voices, but I always try to find like a way of speaking that I guess gives it some sort of life behind it.
Mhm.
Cassandra
Yeah.
and I were talking one way back in the day, because she was struggling to find like a voice for a character she was playing, and I was like, oh well, I read this thing where someone said if you can't find a voice, find a quirk. So she played a character that was constantly like flipping a coin, and especially when they were nervous, so they always had their coin out and they were just flip 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 flip. And I think I find stuff like that like so good at immersing everybody in, like, oh, this character, that's the coin person.
Yes.
um so yeah, having those kind of quirks like that, um hopefully it's helpful. But like I don't feel like anybody in our groups currently needs that. I mean, everyone has got such a well defined, even though you and Ryan are playing new characters, really,
Yeah.
they both have like already this built in wholeness to them. They feel like really
Oh,
well realized characters who just stepped into the game living and breathing and had a life before they got there and will have a life after they're not in the game anymore.
Yeah. Monty is hilarious. Like I love Monty. Like Ryan is like this genius with character creation where he's just really good at it, honestly.
I
Like
think I think Ryan took the idea of Josh, whose name, my everyone's favorite human boy, and just said, "Oh, really? This is what we're gonna do? Guess what? I've got an idea that's gonna trump human boy."
you guys do definitely have a little bit of like the Griffin and Travis thing going back and forth with like Oh my god, in the best way possible.
No, yeah, I love that about him. It's just like you're right. There's no stop to it. It's just like
No,
he's constantly evolving that stuff, and
it's great.
yeah. But I
I
feel like that
wish
whole group's like that. I think
I
all of
know.
you are just fantastic at that.
Aw, thanks. I wish you could see my Richard's in the room and Richard runs a Richard does modules. So we are two very differently minded people. So he loves to run modules. I am a non-linear DM. I don't like being contained, but modules are great for some people. So we're doing Rime of the Frost Maiden right now.
I'm very. I definitely, Richard.
It's
You're gonna have to come
fun.
on and tell me about how that's going because I've heard both wonderful. I have the book. I've heard both absolutely wonderful experiences using it, but I've also heard like some people despise it.
Interestingly, he's having that experience because he's running two different groups. And
Ah,
one of us are really we also I think our characters are also really intriguing in the group that we're doing. Like the character I'm playing in that one is a cleric.
okay.
And she's been a part of one or two other campaigns that Richard's run. Which oddly, Richard has now chosen to set his Rime of the Frost Maiden in the same Faerun that I am running Lovelost Chronicles because like there's a whole bunch of like big stuff going on. So yeah, but my cleric there you'd love. She's literally like she was supposed to be this like Audrey Hepburn, like transatlantic, and she's just turned into Rarity from My Little Pony. Like I don't know when it happened, but like she was put into the elements and now she's just like, that is absolutely terrible. I hate everything here. Everything here is ridiculous, and I'm going to pray to Tamora that we're doing the right thing. Yes, I don't understand what 7 minutes in heaven is. What is that? Like she just doesn't. She doesn't get it. She's the most, and she's somehow turned into like the group mom, and she's like everybody's letting her lead, and I'm like, this is a terrible idea.
Why are you guys doing this?
She's dumb. She's so dumb. Like she obsesses over mythical creatures. Like when we did what was the one that we did before that? Richard, what was the campaign you did before that? Where Brigandarth was all over Ashara and loves her. And like every time she sees pirates, now she wants to hide. She's like, nope, no, do not like pirates. They are bad. They are bad people. And the last time I saw one, I blew a man up, and I did not like that. Dragon Heist, thank you. Yeah, we did Dragon Heist before, and
I have not run any 5e adventures yet. I just haven't.
Frost Maiden's fun. But like Frost Maiden is, I think it's more fun for me because I'm a big Forgotten Realms. Like I love Forgotten Realms and I love Dragonlance. Like I sometimes send Cassandra notes while she's playing because I'm like, oh, we gotta talk. What did you do? Which Tower of Magic did you steal a book from? Like, is Dalamar after you? We need to talk. I need answers. Yeah,
she's only read the book. She's never played any Dragonlance at all.
I love Dragonlance. Dragonlance was how I cut my teeth on fantasy, actually, back in high school. I dated a guy who handed me I don't know. I think it was one of like the short story books where they had like
Really?
just individual stories,
Yeah,
like
like
Bryson Hickman. There was a whole thing about Dalamar in one of them, and then I read the Twins trilogy, and that like hooked me, and I was like, "Ooh, this is good." And then we worked me up to like R.A. Salvatore, and I read a bunch of the Drew Stewart novels, and yeah, so
I am Tolkien was probably, and then one of my dad's masters was in world religion and mythology, so he was big on like, my mom wanted us to go to church, and my dad was like, oh, they can go to church once they read all these religious tomes and decide which church they want to belong to. I'm like, Dad, I'm 10. I'm not going to read the Quran. I will rock out that Bullfinch's mythology, though, you got sitting on your desk.
Amazing.
So like we were really exposed to that, and my dad, Lord of the Rings was one of my family's friends. My mom and dad had a friend friends that were a couple, and we grew up with their kids, and their dad had the white box D&D, and he ran that for us, and I was just like, oh my God. And that led into like Lord of the Rings. And then the first like real book I ever had was um, Edgar Rice Burroughs' Warlord of Mars. So that was like, oh god, that's I think why a lot of weird science fiction stuff gets jammed in my games because I'm so used to like that
Mhm.
Barsoom. But then it was like Robert E. Howard.
Ooh.
Howard was a big deal in my house as far as like my dad was big on the Howard ideal of civilization versus humanity's primal urges. So it would be always like, well, you would read these books and he would say, well, what did you think? And you're like, oh, Conan did this awesome thing, or, you know, this happened and it was amazing. And he would be like, yeah, but what does that mean? Like, what do you think that means? Um, so yeah, that always went on. And he wasn't big on like D&D, but as we were watching Red Letter Media do their own commentary tracks for Army of Darkness. Cassandra and I were, and I was like, this is a movie that whenever it came on, no matter what time, my dad would stop what he was doing just to watch it. It's like it could be 5 in the morning, he'd be like, oh yeah, I got to work at 8. Well, I'm gonna watch this movie.
It's a great
So
movie.
yeah, but it was like that type of Monty Python, like Time Bandits type of stuff was big. And I think kind of having adventure mixed with touches of humor, but also I think juxtaposing your humor with some horror. There should always be elements of like where your players or you or should just be like, that's that's a terrible thing. Like that's a scary, scary, scary concept. Um,
It is. And this is where like you and I are this is kind of where we like differ as DMs. Like horror, you love horror. You do sink into that. You really do.
I don't even
Um
mean to, and sometimes I'm like, oh,
no, it
rein
just
it back, rein it back.
like and for me like horror is not my favorite. I can't run it well cuz it's not my favorite thing. I'm a big my thing is like I really like to I find a balance. Like I try to take a lot of influence from like Brennan Lee Mulligan because I love the way that Brennan crafts his games and sculpts his games and lets his players kind of like run the asylum. Emily Axford. I say that in the most loving way because Emily is like the best part of Unsleeping City, which if anybody is watching this and you have not watched Unsleeping City, I'm a little biased. I love urban fantasy. It's my favorite genre. But God, I love that game. I love that game so much. Like when I went to Central Park, I had to go to the fountain just to see the statue because like she's a character in the game, NPC in the game, and I was like, um, but like I'm, I try to find a really good balance because like my players have a tendency to be very. I like bringing newbies into the fold. So like sometimes it takes like half of a campaign for those people to feel really comfortable in their characters to start really integrating and talking and getting into things. And that can be like a it can be a little bit of a struggle, but like I also really love bringing new players in because like I don't know, I feel like getting into a D&D campaign or any kind of like RPG can be really intimidating for people. I think for some people like it's really intimidating. And then you throw the whole concept of like, oh, it's going to be on Twitch and then it's going to be streamed and then we're going to put it on YouTube and blah 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 blah. And like there's a whole level of nervousness there. Like that's hard to overcome. So I'm not like big on like horror. I like to try and make it really like fun to them. Also, and this is a whole other thing, I am super conscientious these days about like when people are watching something like this, if it's going to be rebroadcast, like there's a reason I have like a trigger warning at the bottom of our episodes and things like that. Cause like Lovelost Chronicles, this is the second adventure that these players have been through, but the first one was never broadcast, right? So they have this whole history, which is kind of fun because I can like it kind of gives me like built-in story that I can like bring to the viewers as they're going because the characters can talk about things that happened. But like, I don't know. They went through some traumatic stuff, and I'm just like I'm kind of like weird about like throwing too much trauma into a game because it can be exhausting both for me and for my players. So like I'm trying to find a happy medium with this campaign because like they're coming out of this whole thing with Faerun has been not like all of Faerun. 3 specific areas have been decimated, right? Because they TLDR in their previous campaign, they wound up in a battle with one of the elder evils, Echok the Violet Flame. Got
Yep.
out, blew up Torm, blew up Waterdeep, and blew up a part of like the southern tip of like the spine of the world, right up in the mountains. Like just so like those 3 areas are decimated. Torm pretty much doesn't exist anymore, which is fine because they're a bunch of a-holes anyway. Seriously, like
If we've learned nothing else in Down Outlands, yes, Torm is a dick. Torm is a
God.
dick.
Yeah, well, and they were really crappy in the game too. And I made the overseer this like malevolent, like, oh god, she sucked. She sucked. Like she was just. I was praying they were gonna kill her. I'm like, please just kill this character. Nope. It's one of those like, no, we're gonna rub your nose in it, and you're gonna think about what you've done, which is kind of perfect. So like they've been through all of this like super traumatic stuff. So like with this campaign, I want to find like a happy medium between making them like relive what they've been through and how they've developed through that trauma, while also trying to kind of keep it light. And I took a little cue from you on this one because there's
Good
there's
idea.
it's an excellent idea. What are you talking about? So there's 2 different stories going on in Lovelost that we haven't gotten to, potentially 3. So it's going to kind of bounce back and forth between different aspects of the story. So while the whole concept of this, if people have watched, great, they get it. If you haven't, like you're about to get like a little backstory. So the party had at the very beginning of the very first like Lovelost Chronicles, like in their second or third like session, they bumped heads with the dragon. And I'm going to watch the chat because Richard's going to lose his mind. They bumped heads with the dragon and the NPC, who was a very good friend of theirs. That's how they all came together. Like had to have a linchpin, right? So Susan was the linchpin, the NPC. Susan sacrificed herself to a dragon to help get the party the information. Like, and the beautiful part is I used see Richard's mad. Richard's like, I still want to kill that SOB.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yes. They've had this like vendetta against dragons ever since. Well, unfortunately, and Richard's fine. I don't care. Like some of my players might watch this and that's fine. This isn't really spoilers for anybody or for them. But through the fighting with Echok, a lot of mythical creatures lost their lives as well, including the dragon that lives in Waterdeep Harbor.
Oh, wow.
Which is gone. Also, the giant shark is nowhere to be found. So
no megalodon for you.
No megalodon. There was a giant. It's a thing. It's in Dragon Heist. It's hilarious.
And somewhere Jason Statham weeps.
Let him. So there's been the whole point is like, yes, they saved the world, and like Faerun runs a little differently in my world because like I'm trying actively to like dismantle a lot of the really problematic parts of D&D. So like the drow and the way that they function completely different in our world.
How did you change? Yeah, how did you change that? I'm intrigued.
Okay, so what we did was when we started the campaign, because like Lovelost started years ago, like that campaign ran for I want to say like 2 years or something like that. It was a really long campaign. I've never really liked the way that kind of the racial codification has worked in D&D. It's obviously very problematic. I mean, like you could talk, Tolkien is like the basis for that. And there's a lot of problematic stuff in Tolkien's work too. It's part of it. So with the drow, what we did was kind of patterned after like a classic kind of uprising story. And maybe I was a little bit influenced by like the events that have happened around us in the last couple of years. I first off started using NPCs as a way to kind of change that narrative where people just were a little bit more inviting and welcoming. We just changed that tone. I stopped making NPCs be like, oh, we've never seen a dragonborn here. Like I don't really like that. It's like an easy change with
the drow. How do you that's such a I always find it to be. I always find it much easier to, like with orcs and goblins but like they so baked just absolute depravity and evil
Into
into
the
the
drow.
drow. It's hard sometimes. I'm like, man, how do I move? It's why I don't use the drow, to be blunt about it, is because I'm always
Mhm.
like, how do I circumvent this kind of this strange, I mean, and that's one reason I think I'd have less of an issue with it, and I don't try to do the mental gymnastics to move out of it,
Mhm.
is this idea of it's just a massive cult. It's just, but it's a cult. It's a cult that is almost completely racially driven, and
Yeah.
I'm always like, okay, it feels gross, but at the same time, I don't know, my brain just doesn't have the elasticity to like move out past that. So yeah, I'm always intrigued when someone's like, "Oh yeah, I've reworked the drow, and this is how they now function." So I can go, "Oh God, please tell me how to work with the drow."
So what we did was I made it a change in generational uprising.
Okay,
The newer generations of drow have had like they've been aware of like this kind of internal problematic piece, and they're like, no, like this is stupid. The way that we're functioning is stupid. We don't like Loth. She's a bitch. Like, girls gotta go. So during when Echok started tearing everything down, because like the entire political structure of Waterdeep as we know it in my Faerun is gone. Lariel Silverhand was actually one of the primary like target NPCs. So she was actually taken over
okay,
and was working under, she was basically being puppeted by an elder evil. So
that's interesting.
yeah, so she specifically Gwekabo. So they are demons that can inhabit an individual, and um they like the people are still conscious, they still have control over what they're doing, but they're basically being like whispered into by like the
Okay.
demon going like, you should do this, what if you did it that way? So they're very hard to detect, they're very hard to see. um
Did you watch The Dragon Prince on Netflix?
no.
So there's one of the main characters is this like advisor who becomes the king, and he's like a wizard, and you see him like basically kind of descend into like madness because he doesn't think that the
Mm.
prince should be king, and so he basically caused all this. At a point, he finds this mirror, and he looks into it, and there's like this. It basically is basically a drow on the other side in this massive, like magical area, who is imprisoned there, and he ends up getting this bug that crawls to his ear and then tells him what that drow is telling him. And it
Ah.
is creepy as hell for a kids show. But that those two characters, I love that idea of like that guy was already on the road to personal ruin, but this wizard like just goes, "Here, let me show you," and just shoves him completely off the cliff. Um, and I really like that whole dynamic, and it's so well done because this wizard also has two kids, and one of them is like the captain of the guard, and the other is like this very strong wizard herself.
Hmm.
And they're so loyal to him that they're unwilling to see like how far gone he is.
Yep.
It's
Yeah.
that show's really good. James is absolutely in love with it. I think it's
I'll have to check
pretty
that
good.
out. We
It's
we had a
really fascinating.
we had a bit of that too, because like that was kind of the whole thing about Lovelost in the original was all of the like primary antagonists, they weren't great people, but so they were like already kind of on this path, but like their actions were not necessarily like their own fault. They were being influenced by this crazy abyssal power that like nobody could detect and nobody could see, and it was very slow. So like what happens is with Waterdeep, like the entire political structure is gone. Like there's only I think like 3 of the lords still exist. Like the entire power structure of Waterdeep has changed. These generations of younger drow, the way that we built it in, who have known that this has been a problem. So like the current like 2 generations, they've had a problem with like the power structure, but they've never had an opportunity to seize the moment and make the change. As things were changing in Waterdeep and when the world went into chaos, they took advantage of that opportunity and they toppled the entire hierarchical structure of Menzoberranzan. They literally ripped entire palaces off of the ceilings. They,
Wow.
yeah, like they burned part of the city. They destructed a whole bunch of things and they said, no, this is ridiculous. We live as equals. We are equal beings. We are no longer going to like fit into this like crappy narrative that you people have forced us to live for generations. Like, deal with it. And they changed this entire structure. So they took advantage of the opportunity and they said, no, like, this isn't just about like the people up on the surface. If Echok the Violet Flame, like, it was kind of like a common bonder in that Echok would have just taken over everything. Like, the Violet Flame doesn't care. She will consume it all. And
Okay.
that includes everything. Loth wasn't answering. No other deity was answering. Like, the only deity that could even get through during this time, there were two that managed. One was Mystra, and that's because Mystra was trying to orchestrate how to take down Echok, because she was really the only one that was powerful enough. And then the only other deity that was even able to be reached was Kelemvor. And that's because Kelemvor just kind of operates on his own. And Kelemvor was like, yeah.
I love the idea too with Mystra. Mystra is very
gray line.
well, I always look at Mystra as like is very much, I think, to me, Mystra, and I should say this is just my interpretation, is always like this ideal of, you know, almost like Promethean ideal of like, I'm giving fire to the people, but at the same time I always feel like Mystra is like, I'm keeping a couple things in my back pocket when shit goes sideways, so I always have a way out. Like, you're not going to destroy me, because even if you think you did, I always have a backup to my backup.
Yes, and that is absolutely how she functions in my Faerun as well. She one of the NPCs, which we've had pop into Lovelost Chronicles, is a demon by the name of Kalile. Okay. And Kel, as we call her, who is a sultry little minx, and we love her. She is absolutely all about just messing with their day. She was a demon who wanted to get out, so Mystra used her during the Violet Wars, which is what we refer to as the Echok the Violet Flame time, the Violet Wars. She used Kalile to get abyssal information as kind of an undercover agent.
Okay.
And promised Kalile freedom. So if Kalile helped get Echok sealed back up, Mystra would use her ability to at least let Kalile the fuck out of the abyssal plane. So it was a whole lot of like, just so Kel is kind of like an agent of information. She was deeply involved with the Harpers, but the Harpers, as we know them in this campaign, like most of them were killed off. There's a new sect of them that's been, they were heavily involved in like what happened. So that's kind of like, that's where we are. So, but the other way that I change that kind of narrative with like the problematic is honestly, it's all about like character interaction. Like when drow show up, it's not like, it's like, oh, cool. Yeah. Like I had several drow NPC that would come in and like help them out. And they were dealing with information and they were trying to make sure that like, you know, certain beholders living in the sewers didn't come mess with everything while we were trying to, you know, plant fights. Looking at you, Xanathar, you jerk. You know, so it's really just about changing that narrative. And now they're like, you know, I think of things like the Yawning Portal, like the pub where adventurers used to come and like go down and try to like take on the drow. They would go into the Underdark and like they may never come back. They may come back. Now it's like it's a watering hole for the drow. They're like, hell yeah, like let's come out. Like you wanna go, let's go. And they'll like go on stupid little adventures, and it's just a very different vibe. And it's one of those things that like I try to carry with all of my characters too. Regardless of where we're playing. Like in Richards, I've thrown a couple of wrenches in the works at some of my DMs that I work with, because, you know, doing Rime of the Frost Maiden, Ashara, my cleric, you know, when we came across a bugbear, she has this like deep love of like weird mythical creatures. Like she has a unicorn statue that has the spirit of a unicorn trapped in it that she just wanted because like I need to have a unicorn. Um so the unicorn lives in her room. So every time she comes across something, she's like, "Oh, it's a mythical creature. Can we befriend it?" Yes. I would very much like to ride the griffins. Can we go the route of the griffins? Because that would be so fun. Um so but like when we came across this like bugbear warrior, instead of just immediately assuming like it should be a fight, it was nah, like what's up, dude? And that like through that, like we wound up befriending this bugbear. Ashara used her influence to get the bugbear a job, and now he's like taking over like and helping to run and restore one of the 10 towns. Like so it's all about like just changing that. Don't lean into like the problematic narratives, but don't make like a big deal out of it. Just make it like this is how it is. Like the character, I kind of wish I hadn't killed her off. Because she was a great character. And I did not create her. She was provided to me by a friend who found this thing online. But there was a half orc drag queen that ran the feathered boa that was really good friends with Fear, who's our halfling character in Lovelost Chronicles, played by my friend Rin. Um, and like the feathered boa was one of those places where like everybody was just welcome because it was like a pro LGBTQ space, and it was every race hung out there. Like it didn't matter like who you were, what your backstory was, and it was never like a big deal. It was just like you just write it in. Like, and I think that's where a lot of DMs struggle is you don't need to make like a big deal out of it. There doesn't always need to be like a huge catalyst. Like the stuff that happened in Menzo Berenzin happened. We never explicitly like showed it happen in game. We never had like deep conversations about it or anything like that. It was just the drow showed up and they were like, "Oh yeah, no, like we got real sick of them. Like those jerks, they're gone. We're cool. What do y'all need help with? Because we're here to help." It's just you don't. I think like we get so baked into that like this is how it's always been that we have a hard time getting out of that space as DMs. And sometimes you have to just like normalize it. Like it's one of the reasons I really love the way like Brennan and Mercer, like to his credit, like Mercer's gotten better about this too. The way that they run their games, because like there'll be like non-binary characters that show up and it's never like a huge thing, and like no one asks about pronouns or anything like that. It's just like you just like you refer to that character as they, or you know, like you just kind of like do it. And I think that's how you change the narratives is you just do it and you don't make a big deal out of it. You just change it. And now what's beautiful is like our players in Lovelost Chronicles they're a pretty diverse group. Like I wish I had like BIPOC representation in that group, and that's something I do want to fix in the future. Unfortunately, all of my BIPOC friends were not able to like do something this consistent, which sucks because my friend's song would have been a perfect choice for this, but she's going to Europe to study acting for like a year.
That's
So
amazing.
yeah, I'm super proud of her. Shout out to Song. You're gonna do great things, baby. I'm so proud of you. But you know, we have a lot of LGBTQ representation. We have a lot of non-binary representation, both with myself and with Rin. And I think we're all very like social forward. So we just try to just like make it a normal part of the narrative. Like this is just these changes exist. Like this is just how it functions. So like no one bats an eye when it's a race that like they haven't seen a whole lot. Especially like in the wake of tragedy and what's happened in Waterdeep. Like the people of Waterdeep are just like, no, like they're finally all united. But that's what kind of like lends it into this story, because now all of these beings that like live in Faerun are great, but the mythical creatures that exist there, so dragons, minotaur, like some of the races that like you don't see who have been traditionally like these kind of like big mythical creatures, they've been targeted nonstop for so long. And then during the Violet Wars, our party caused a lot of chaos because they were trying to save the world, right? Well, they were trying to save the world for the ones that were like easy to communicate with and the ones that are around all the time. Did anybody take into account the safety of the dragon in Waterdeep? No. Did anybody take into account?
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's the whole concept. So what's happening with Lovelost is the heroes of Faerun, who is our party, like our core five, except for Narissa. Narissa's a new character, so Narissa's kind of just like getting scooped in with them, which is interesting because Lizzie's kind of our new player. So Narissa's kind of being brought in as a water genasi, but we also have a dragonborn who struggles a lot with social interaction. So I think there's going to be a lot of like what I'm hoping for from my players, because I know them pretty well, is a lot of like moral struggle in this game. Like, yeah, we thought about the ones that are around all the time. We didn't think about the way that this impacts like the people that I descended from. Like, how did this impact the dragons? Like, the dragons lost multiples. The dragons have been targeted by people for years. When you think about things like Tiamat, like super feared and blah blah blah. So like that's the whole concept, is like these mythical creatures have been tread upon for so long and targeted. So now what's happening, and we saw a little bit of this in Monday's episode, Baphomet's in this too, which is really interesting because, like, boy, you want to talk about a deity that has a lot of negative connotation in Forgotten Realms.
Yeah.
Specifically cultists, and that's kind of what we're seeing. So, like, that still exists, but they're kind of unified.
So, are you talking about Baphomet, or are you talking about the demon prince Baphomet?
Baphomet, sorry. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
The Minotaur,
who like had a bunch of cultists following him and blah 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 blah. So that's kind of what's happening. And what I want to do is I want to tell both sides of this story. So I have made my players also, and this is where I took a cue from you, they also have dragon players because I want them to think about both sides of the fight.
Did you what are you using for them to play dragons?
Fizzbins.
Okay. Have you seen, of course, I'm going to ask if I sent you something, which generally means I have not.
Generally means you have not.
Have you seen 2C Gaming's Dragonflight book?
No.
Which is built just for 5e players to play dragons.
Yo, hook me up.
Yeah, I will send. Yeah, it's a really good book. 2C Gaming makes some really interesting stuff.
That sounds super cool.
They have an epic set of epic books. So it's like, hey, do you want to keep playing after 20th level? Here's how. They have a book called Tyrants and Hellions, which is like, here's a bunch of super bad guys for each level. But they made a book not too long ago, and the reason I picked it up was because Mike Shea had just like went on and on and on about it, and then I looked into it, and I was like, this book is perfect for Oops All Dragons. Although I say that we haven't went back to that.
We have not done anything with that, and I'm dying because my dragon character for that is so fun, and I just want to I want to bring her out because Siobhan is like, oh, she's ready. She's ready.
Yeah, it's I mean, I got the idea of doing that because way back in the day, we played Council of Worms in college, and I was like, oh crap, this is really cool. Which was a second edition thing where you play dragons.
Yeah.
So yeah, I will grab that and send it to you. When you look at a lot of that stuff, how do you? Oh, it's in the Oops All Dragon folder already.
Oh, perfect. Okay, cool.
How do you work on that balance of having villains who aren't just mustache twirling, tie you to a railroad track bad guys? Because I think that's something that I try to do. I don't think I'm always very successful with it.
You're more successful than you think, but that's a good question. I think I try to think about them as like, why are they doing what they're doing, and do they really believe in what they're doing? My favorite kind of villains are like, I like your Magnetos. I like your, you know what I mean? Like the ones who like Thanos was right. He like changed my mind. Like the characters who really think that they're doing something for the betterment. Now, like when I was dealing with the Elder Evil, that's a whole other story because that was just like take over everything. This is like a little bit different. Like I want each of these characters to have a vested interest, and I'm most interested to see like how this impacts Jessie, who's playing our Dragonborn Ranger, because like she has really deep ties to her dragon heritage. So like this is going to impact her very hard, and I'm actually really looking forward to the way that that plays out in game. I think with me it's like I try to think about like what's their motivator? Like do they really believe in what they're doing? Are they just doing it for the sake of evil, or like do they have a moral reason to feel that way? Like what is their purpose? So like I'm thinking about this like with the dragons, and like not all of their dragon characters are probably going to agree with what's happening, and that's like that's perfectly fine. It's just like anything, like if you get a council, you call the council of Dracus together, not all of them are going to agree. Like they're going to have separate perspectives. They're going to have like separate takes on things. Some of them are going to be like, this doesn't impact me, I just want to go back to my comfortable horde. Like, whatever, let them all kill one another, I don't care. And then some of them are going to be like, no, like we've spent too long doing this, like now is the time for us, like we deserve to live as equals, we also have our own deity who's being disrespected. Like how do they feel about it? What is the reason that the villains have this kind of draw to do something? Also, like, are they being manipulated? So like when they did the first season of Lovelost, like all these characters truly believed in what they were doing. Like our first antagonist, who wound up like everybody thought was the BBEG, and he was not. Like he was a pawn. He was just like cracking the surface, and that was Lance, or as they like to refer to him, Dick Butt. They really hated that character. I wanted him to have like a redeeming piece, and that was the whole point. And I think because of that, they all hated him more. Like they, to this day, they get so mad when we talk about Lance. Because like
it's hard to do that. It's really hard to pull that off. I passed a game to a player for a little bit so I could play, and they and I agreed. I was like, okay, I'm going to play this character. They're either going to we had one kind of character in the group who was kind of starting to steer towards evil. I was like, okay, well, either that character will probably kill this character, or this character will eventually just leave, or whatever. Doesn't really matter. So I played a very like not self-righteous, but very good paladin character who was just like, I'm here because I'm here to save all of you from yourselves. Like I think what you're doing is good, but you're going about it in such a hyper violent way. Have you looked at all the collateral damage in life that you've caused? And that character would constantly call out that character in the group who was steering towards evil and be like, are you guys going to listen to this person who has no moral qualms about doing this? And I actually had some characters who were starting to like steer back, like, oh God, that paladin character is kind of right. He's kind of, but he's kind of not always the nicest about it, but he's also like, because I was never like pushy about the religion part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd always like, listen, I'm going to go pray and tithe. If anyone wants to come, they're more than welcome to. And the thing was like, I'm not here to push my religion. I'm just here to tell you, you could be so much more than you are right now.
Yeah.
So it was so interesting when we got to a point where we were ready to hand reins back over, and myself, the person DMing, and the character who was steering towards evil had a conversation, and I was like, I'm fine if you kill that character. Like, I'm fine if you stab him in the back and kill him, but just be warned. I think that is going to destroy your credibility with the group. And he was like, nobody likes that character. No one, they all think you're a stick in the mud. And I know that's like the point, but so in the middle of this big fight, the character I was playing ended up saving 2 members of the group. Like, but in the process, like as the battle got super chaotic towards the end, by doing that, put himself in a position where the character who was ended up being evil stabbed him in the back and killed him. I was shocked at how the group
Wow.
dynamic shifted so hard the other way. They basically got to a point where the guy playing the evil character left the group entirely
Oh my
because
god.
they all were like, "What are you doing?" That guy was kind of a dick, but he was like, he was healing us all the time, and he wasn't pushy about it. And like, why would you do that? And he had no other justification beyond, well, that guy was doing stuff I didn't want him to do. And they're like, "Oh, so what
Mm,
happens when we don't do what you want us to do? You gonna stab us in the back? You kill us while we're sleeping?" And he had no response because he had become such kind of a two-dimensional version of what had been a three-dimensional character.
mm,
So I think that's really hard. And I
it
think
is.
playing characters that skew, and it's why I'm kind of just like doing away with alignment and mostly. Um, I think when you're playing characters who are so stuck in an alignment that it dictates decision making and direction, it pigeonholes you into things because, like you said, bad people make good decisions sometimes, and good people make terrible decisions sometimes. So it can really affect the dynamic of the interplayer relationships, but also their relationships with the NPCs and the world around them.
I think yes and no. Like I am kind of a stickler for alignment, but only in the ways that like if you're doing something that just feels so out of character for that alignment, like that's when I'm going to question you. Like if you're going to do like there's a difference between making a bad decision and then making a bad decision that's going to like potentially cost the life of one of the characters that they're with. Like in an instance where like if you have a character like I hate to bring in like Magnar, but like Magnar is a good
No,
example.
he's a good
Like
example.
he is a good example. And like I look at like what he's doing with Charity right now, and like Charity's one of those characters that like she is she's so inherently good because she's a kid. And that was the whole concept behind like the development of the Archmage in Stormsong is like it will always be a child. It will always be a child that is brought up with love and support so that they have like that good basis. But like she was always just a little too chaotic. Like she's actually more powerful than Leona. But she's very spectrum, and she just, like they saw that as an instability instead of a strength, which is a problem. Because honestly, she would have been the better choice. But because of where they put her, now she's on that point where like Charity could either be like the greatest hero Stormsong has ever seen or their biggest villain.
Yeah, that's
And
one
like
reason.
she
If you notice, there's a lot of that goes on.
yeah.
There's a lot of like, let's see if I can. A lot of villains who are like, or perceived villains who are like, "Hey, buddy,
Hey, buddy. You like tigers with backwards hands? No, no, I do not. Eat
do you like
shit.
people who can be chairs?" I mean, that's the
Do
thing.
you
I
like
think,
liches? No.
and I think with Magnar, I kind of look at Magnar is a lot of his own stuff going on,
Yeah.
but in relation to Charity, Magnar is literally a shitty version of Jiminy Cricket.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
He's like,
That's kind of
because
how I've seen him too.
he's a selfish version of Jiminy Cricket because he's like, "Oh, I find I can have my salvation through you."
Yeah.
So it's less to do about you and it's more to do like, you can give me
Mm.
salvation. So I'm going to do what I think what I'm doing is right, but because I'm so far removed from what right is now that I don't even know anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of I'm gonna try to do that with most of those characters. Like Tawny's got a lot of stuff. Whenever I always think it's funny, whenever anything comes out, all of you guys are like, "What?" Like there's been no moment of pure clarity within anybody in the group where it's been like, "Oh, Tawny was not that good a person." Like, what was he really doing with all these kids?
Yeah. Yeah.
And was it good the way he was doing it, or was it not good? I'm not sure.
I think the only character that's kind of even come close to like questioning everything is Bliss.
Yeah.
Bliss is kind of like, who are you people? The hell are you doing?
But I also look at some of that as like, because Bliss has is like way more street smart, a little bit older, has been
Yeah.
through some horrible shit, and is like, I see someone using. I know what users look like. This feels a
Yeah.
lot like like someone who's just wanting to use.
Yeah, it feels very usy.
But I think
Um,
all of those characters, to some degree, I think to have characters that actually have some type of legs, they should have some type of, here's the positive, like
mhm.
here's the very pinnacle of their positive nature, but here's like the negative. Like Felix is really easy because he's the most like overt NPC I think you guys deal with currently.
Mhm.
And the positive is he's like, I want to show you guys everything. To me, you're instantly siblings because I was told you're siblings. So I want to show you every cool thing that has ever existed. The low end of it is he's someone who is, some of that comes from feeling unloved. So I just want people to love me. Love me because I feel unloved.
I'm very concerned about Norhand right now.
Well, Noran's another one. I mean,
Yeah.
when you tie yourself up into, I think, an ideal, and Norhand was an NPC in another game I ran with like Ryan and
Mm.
those guys in it. And Norhand, they were kind of seeing Norhand when her ship was broke and she was working for money to, and so at the end of that game, she took some PCs with her because she was like, do you guys want to stick around and deal with this dickhead PC? Or do you want to come with me and
You
like,
would come
I'm
with
gonna,
me on fun
yeah,
pirate adventures.
yeah, we're gonna do pirate stuff in space, suckers. But Norhand is definitely like, I always look at Norhand as someone who wants dad's approval.
Yeah.
And I will do some underhanded piratey shit to get it.
Yeah, there's some
Um,
daddy issues there. There's some daddy issues there for
but
sure.
also I look at it as like, because I did not intend early on to kill Peerless, and I had a conversation with somebody, and I was like, well, what do you do if you suck the moral center out of somebody, where someone's been in a relationship with someone who's been like, this person shows me, is the mirror that shows me all the good I actually am.
Mhm.
They remind me on a consistent basis, and then you yank that out from underneath them. What happens to them? And they were like, well, think about someone with an addiction issue, or think about somebody who is extremely codependent, and what happens when you pull the rug out of their
Mhm.
stability. I was like, oh, well, that's what's going to happen. you know
I try really hard with those kinds of things too to like lean into my characters too, or like my players, because like here's the thing, as a DM, I can speak to my own lived experiences, but I don't presume to understand the lived experiences of the people in my group as well. So like I try to be very careful when I'm dealing with things like addiction or family trauma or things like that. And I explicitly, we have and this is something I recommend a lot of groups start doing. We have kind of like a code of ethics that we all agree on before we start, and we all kind of like read it together and we sign it, and we make sure that like me as a DM, like I'm not going to cross certain boundaries. There's certain things like that I will not do. Like child unaliving, not gonna happen. Like it, we had a little bit of it, but it's just like it wasn't like intentional. It was like war happened, the city got blown up, like bad things happened, right? I try to be very mindful about things like addiction, because like you never know what your players are going through too. So like we kind of have like a code of ethics that we follow and we agree upon, and we agree that there are just certain things that we are not going to do in this game. Because like honestly, I feel like if you're in like closed doors, whatever, like, but especially if you're going to put something on the internet, like you need to be really mindful about that stuff. And so I try really hard to be like extra mindful about those things and not like lean too hard into like the let's explore this trauma. Cause I feel like so many people, I gotta say this. I gotta put this out there. You can have an intriguing character without a shit ton of trauma in their backstory. Like, not every character needs to be like, my parents were unalived at age 4 and blah 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 blah. Like, no. Like, my favorite character I've ever played, who I think I gave to you as a potential NPC. So we'll see if we ever see Dahlia or not. Like my favorite character I've ever played is Dahlia, who is a half elf fighter. She's like 4'7" or something. She's like this tiny little like petite framed half elf who's a complete and utter dipshit. And she had a great upbringing. Like her parents are great. Like she was given an opportunity to like train to be a part of the Elven Guard, and she's like, no, I want to go on adventures.
Dahlia's was
And
a teacher. That's right.
yeah. So she's there's no trauma in her backstory. She had a great upbringing. She has a wonderful family. She has a very loving brother who she has a great relationship with. She just wants to go on adventures. Like she didn't want to deal with all that high elf crap that daddy deals with, and she loves her dad and they have a great relationship. So there's never been a whole like there's no dad issues there's no mom issues. Like she sends them postcards, she sends them letters, like everything is hunky-dory and she's just happy. And I had some of the funniest character interactions with that character that I've had in any game. Like she fell head over heels in love with this stupid gunslinger that our friend Kale was playing, who was this like lanky dark elf gunslinger who had a constitution of like 2. Like the dude would fall out of he'd fall out of bed and like freaking injure
broken.
himself for days. Yeah. And like so she'd get so mad because like but she was so dumb. Like she was so strong. She had like I started her with like an 18 strength. Like everything was strength. She had no intelligence and no wisdom. Like I think her intelligence was her dump stat. So she would walk into like dungeon crawls and walk right into a trap and go, ow, and like stand there for a second. And then she'd walk right back into the trap like a Roomba, trying to figure out where the path forward is and just repeatedly bumping. That's Dahlia. And so like you can play really fun, intriguing characters without a shit ton of traumatic backstory. You can play characters that are going to interact well with people, who you can bring personal stories into, and it doesn't all need to be trauma focused.
I don't think I use, and this is just my opinion, I don't think I use trauma as a focus. I think I try to give NPCs a high and a low.
Yeah,
totally. Sometimes it can be trauma, but like Keska has no trauma.
Right.
Keska's just like I want to be the very best, you know,
like no one ever was.
Yeah. So, and she's just very, you know, like to her, Tiamat is like that's the jam. So she's gonna do whatever she has to do, but she's also in her own Githyanki way very affectionate towards her siblings that she cares about. So I don't ever look at Dresk as having trauma. Dresk is just like, I'm stuck on this job. I maybe I kind of like Keska, maybe I don't know if I do, but like all this other shit.
You've got a lot of really cool like NPC characters in the game that are not trauma focused, and that's my whole point. Is it's like you can have a good balance of everything. Like I look at Akko, like everything is just easy, you know. Like
that's why I think that's why in some ways I'm a little surprised that Ryan's been like, oh yeah, I'm fine leaving Bitopia. Because I'm like, but are you? Because Akko's like with his family, he's like got this perfect, like you're in heaven, like, and it's literally heaven for you. So would Akko be like, well, got to get back to the prime material plane about now? Because even Skitch is like, I don't really want to go back to the prime material plane. I'm just trying to get paid. I want you to help me get paid.
Yeah.
Buddy. So I think there's always some of that. I think it's unless I'm going to write like just a ream of stuff about a character, I try to just keep it in generalities. And sometimes I think you're right though. Sometimes the generality of a low end is easy to go like, you know, mom and dad were killed in Crime Alley. So it's just, but it doesn't have to be that. It's just hard to sometimes find exactly how to circumnavigate that into more of this person's just bossy. That's their low end. They're just, you know, Krellis is a good example. Krellis is just bossy.
Yeah.
She just wants to be the leader of her tribe. And if she thinks you're going to be a member of her tribe, then you better listen to orders.
I think it's one of the reasons I love my players in Lovelost too, is like when we look at the characters, like they don't all have like they have really like, for the most part, some of them have like a lot of wholesomeness in their backstory. Like Fear, the halfling, Fear has like no memory of, like, their memory was kind of wiped at one point because Massive had trauma. Uh right? I know. So like they're the worst thing that happened with them was like they're a thief basically. Like they're a rogue, but like they don't remember how they learned those skills. So like they had a background with the coiners where like they kind of like just fell into like some shady dealings, and now the coiners are kind of like up their butt all the time. So every once in a while they kind of resurface and they're like $2, give me my $2. Celia, who's Richard's character, who's our non-binary cleric to Kalimvor, like Celia had like, you know, that very religious kind of upbringing in a way that like, you know, they were all together in a convent, but like they had a friend who as part of their backstory was just totally not in line with anything, and like used to do like all this mischievous crap, like sneak into the kitchen in the middle of the night and like steal cake, and they would like hide in the attic and like eat cake together. There Narissa has like no traumatic backstory, super loving family. Like they're just kind of like, who are you people and why the hell am I looped in with this, and why did the big crazy dragon god summon me with you guys? What the hell did I do? You have
It was other kids.
Yeah, it was other kids. That was another group of shitty little kids, not me. There's Corin, who also has like no real bad backstory. Shay has kind of a traumatic backstory to some degree, but not. It's a little bit different. Like I'm hoping we can explore a little bit more of Shay's in the group. So I don't want to, like, we'll delve into that. Because Shay was a druid at one point, who walked away from being a druid to become a barbarian. So Shay is like this super like hippie, like, yo, roll with it, man, until like you poke the bear and then he rages out and like murders everything and then goes back to being like, you know. So it's like they're a really fun group of characters.
When I play with my niece and nephew, I have a female monk who does that all the time. She's like, hey man, like, why? Like, I don't want to do this with you, man. Just like chill. And then she's got like one hand that says peace and one hand that says war. Don't make me choose, man. Pick a hand.
I love it.
We don't gotta do this. And my niece and nephew just they love that character.
Shay always
funny because I love their characters.
Shay always gives me like borderline like Lebowski vibes. Like like it's just a thing. Yeah, but it's one of the reasons I can't wait to see what kind of like dragon characters they've come up with. Which I hope you're not like irritated about that, because
no, I love that.
Okay, cool.
To me, that's when you can take something that, when you have an idea that's cool, and this is one reason, like initially when we started doing like Extra Life and stuff, I think I was the only person running. And then we like, this is well, we've done Extra Life for like 6 or 7 years now. We had somebody play in one of the Extra Life groups, and they were like, hey, I wanna run. Can we use your homebrew setting? And I was like, sure, I don't care. Yeah, it's a big place. We only really do stuff on part of one continent. And I have 3 groups in that world running simultaneously. So sure. What I think got me at first, and actually took me a while to get over, like I got really frustrated by, was they had a session 0 where they sat around and they made a list of things that I do in my games they did not want to do. Like things that I utilize, and they were like, we don't want this in our game. And it probably for like a good year to 2 years, honestly, I was like, fuck you guys, make your own shit then. Like, why are you like taking something that's ostensibly mine and then it took me a couple years, but I got to the point where I was like, do I really give a shit that much about something? I should look at it as like a compliment of like, oh, the base of my thing is cool enough to build off of. But I think it's hard. And I think I've gotten to the point now where like someone says, hey, can I do this with this? I'm always like, that's cool, because if you're running a dragon group and I'm running a dragon group, who's to say those dragons don't ever interact? And to me, that's awesome, because that's this idea of like, hey, the multiverse is a cool giant, pool party where anybody can, can jump in.
Hell yeah. That's one
And
of the reasons, like, when you were like, "Hey, can we use Storm Song," which is
yeah,
my homebrew world, as like a piece of Down and Out, I was like, "Hell yeah." Like, by all means, take it. Like, let's run with it. Let's do it. I
and
love it.
that's why whenever I've been like, I'm thinking about maybe, can I break this?
You
Or
can break it. It's
can I
fine.
start to crack it and then hand it to you and go, you break.
Yeah. Yeah. Which
You
I'm
break in way you like.
you break.
You break.
And I sit there and I go, let's crack open the geode and see what pretties we get today. Yeah, I'm totally down with that. Cause like, I don't know, like I'm always about changing narratives for the better. And I think like I try really hard to do it with Love Lost. And I'm not perfect. Like I fuck up. I fuck up a lot.
I don't feel bad.
We all do. We all do. Like I think as DMs, like my big problem was like for years, I was a very linear GM, and I actually walked away from DMing for a very long time because I had a hard time getting out of that linear space. So now when I plan my sessions, it's very different than what I used to do. I don't like write every little thing, and I try to let the players dictate where they're going to go. So like I'll do like I have a document that I use as like a recurrence. So I'll have like what happened in the last session, what are the main hooks, what are the side hooks that I know are going on, and then I'll make a list of like potential locations that they could wind up, potential encounters that they may run into, and I kind of try to prepare.
That lazy DM style.
Yeah,
That worksheet is such a good framework to build around.
it really is. And it's like it's great because like so right now we have this kind of like the way that I'm bringing in the concept of like other deities like being a part of this, so like other creatures, like I want to bring gnolls into this at some point. um
How are you going to handle gnolls? I know it's been a huge like topic
yeah.
of back and forth in our groups. How do you see gnolls?
Honestly, I
No,
see them
I want you to completely lie to me.
completely lie. Everyone is wonderful. I honestly see them as like just because they have different cultural perspectives doesn't mean that they are right or wrong. It is simply that they have a different kind of lived experience. I mean, I'm kind of going to be doing the same thing with like minotaurs. Like a lot of them follow a deity that is theoretically evil. Like Baphomet is not a good deity. Like they're a demon. Like there's this
yeah,
whole
they're like a demon prince. I
They're a
don't think
demon
there's a whole lot of theoretical behind it.
but like that's the whole thing is like there's this whole like do we perceive them as evil? Yes, because like that's the way that they've been written. However, like to them, like that is just
But
that's just the way that they live.
With Minotaurs, though, you have an out because other settings in D&D have not used Baphomet as the origin of Minotaurs.
Right.
You know, like
like,
Kryn is a great example.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, totally valid. But like that's like who's to say we can't just make up the same thing about Noel? Like what if like in some other area? Like I also I'm just really big on like changing that narrative because like it doesn't always need to be like we can just change it. It's I don't need to necessarily like justify it. Like we can kind of just like
I don't think you do
it.
either. I agree. I think that to me, when you start to look at Knowles, to me is kind of the perfect example of this because I can't think of many other races that are basically abyssal in nature according to the lore. To me, Knowles offshoot into two versions in my head now. You have Knowles, who are basically the classic Slaver mod, Yingao worshipping, just marauding monsters. And then you have like a Knoll that is more like the only reason they're called Knolls is because that's the only name that the rest of the races like, oh, you're a Knoll. And they're like, but am I a Knoll? Because my people we don't call ourselves Knolls. We're just more of a tribal humanoid. And they've got their own shit going on. So which is kind of where I look at like Akko and I look at the Knolls on like I can't think of Mercer's homeworld now. Exandria. I look at it like the Knolls of Exandria or the Knolls in Eberron, they're just that's not their thing.
Yeah. I love
So
Eberron so much.
that's the thing too. I still want to run the challenge, and I still want to use Eberron as the setting and use that pulp and noir system because I think it'll be easy. I've never run an Eberron game, but the I love the idea of Eberron. Um, so yeah, I think that there's cool things you can do with that, and I think you can do the same thing with like um, turning the Drow, like the most evil components of the Drow, into a less of a cult and more of like when you look at some of the major religions we have in the world, that they do some shit that is absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
That the Drow have an entire component of people who want a theological system of rule, and those folks worship, Loth, and they stay within the tropes of the Drow. And then you have, I think, and this is something D&D has gone to more of the last like 2 editions, where they've been like, but there's Drow who don't subscribe to that at all. They're like, I'm out.
I also have to, like, and this is where I get a little critical of Wizards. They have not done a really good job. Like, I appreciate that they came out and they were like, it's unfortunate that it took a bunch of world events to make them finally go, oh, hey, our systems are kind of problematic, we should change this. The way that they've addressed the situation with the Drow, I think, is asinine. The fact, like, I appreciate one of the subsets of Drow that they've created, but now they've kind of got these like 3 different views, and in one they actually made it worse than it was, because they've gone very like tribal, and they have these like, they use like white paint on their body and shit, and I'm like,
Isn't that the Eberron Drow?
I think it is. Yeah.
It is.
And like, I don't like that at all. Like, I feel it. And a lot of BIPOCs have heavily criticized
I think that
Wizards
group
for that.
Yeah, I think that group of Drow, that Keith Baker based them off the Maori, because they're like, they live in the old giant lands.
Right.
So they have nothing to do with like what's going on in the primary continent. They've got their own thing going on.
It's more just like the representation there is like, it's problematic.
I always look at stuff like that. I'm like, how far can you go in using a culture as a baseline to build off of until it becomes appropriation? It's no longer an homage. It's no longer an homage. Yes. It is a shot for shot recreation. I'm looking at you, Psycho.
It's true though. Like, that is a problem. Like, there's a big difference between like appreciation and appropriation, and I think that that's where a lot of, like, I think like an example of where it was done really well is if you look at like Avatar: The Last Airbender, like the whole series, beautifully done, had appropriate like cultural guidance on the way that they built the world, etc. Like, it's one thing if they sat down with like Maori leaders and, consultants, and were like, how do we do this? But I think that's the problem. If you're not inviting those voices to the table when you're doing that building, don't fucking touch it, because it's not ours to touch.
That's the thing where I have a real soft spot about, because oh God, it's been like 5 years ago. I ran a series of games that I called the Juramento, which was based heavily on like an amalgamation of South American, like Aztec, Incan, but it also had like the colonists / gosh darn, the word I'm looking for just ran out of my head. Invaders were like halflings that were based heavily on like Japanese culture, and they were your subjugators, and the players played native folks who were going through like their Juramento, which was like their coming of age, and I used like masks and things like that, and the people who played in it were like, this is awesome. I did way too much research. But the problem is like a couple of years ago, someone asked me about going back and rerunning that. And I said, I don't think I feel comfortable doing that.
No.
And they were like, well, why? I said, because I think it crosses the line of like homage and like the fact of my appreciation for those cultures, and the fact that they're so different than my cultural background, that it goes with, there's no cultural sensitivity to it. It's just me looking at it and going, these ideas are cool. I want to integrate them into my game because they're an experience none of us have, and we can, look at it and go, oh wow, this is amazing. But the problem is the intent kind of ceases to matter when you don't have the perspective.
Yes. Okay. That's the whole thing. It's like impact outweighs intention.
Yeah.
This is a conversation I've had a lot with some of my players, because there's been, last year specifically on TikTok, there was a lot of input where a lot of BIPOC content creators who do D&D and other things, like they vehemently disagree with people wanting to play characters that are considered like people of color. Like specifically, it was around the Drow. So they're like, if you don't understand our lived experience and you don't understand like that racial codification, like you really shouldn't play one of these characters. And like people really felt some kind of way about it. And I felt really bad because like at the time I had a Drow character in a campaign that I had built years ago. So that's Ashara, my cleric. And I specifically, like, I went to the people that we were playing with in the group and I was like, if this character bothers you, if I have crossed a line, if I am appropriating in any way, you guys need to tell me. I will set her aside and I will make a new character. I don't care how invested I am in this. Like, you have to, number one, you have to be conscientious of the fact that, like, if people with intersecting marginalized identities are saying, like, hey, don't do this thing, it's problematic, like, we need to listen regardless of how we feel, because that impact outweighs that intention, right? Here's my DEI practitioner thing coming through, right? Even in my nerddoms, it's a thing.
And
it's my life. I mean, this is what I do for a living outside, by the way, my muggle job. I'm a training manager and I work as a DEI practitioner. So for people that aren't aware, like, that's what I do for a living. And number two, like, if we are building these things, like, there are people that are representative of those communities that have built these things for us, and we should be using their tools. So like, if you're not a queer individual but you want to like include like queer characters, and you want to do it in a way that's maybe you have like an NPC and you're like, I want to run this character. So like, you could use something like adventuring with pride, or if you want to have like disabled representation, like as a disabled person, like that's why, like, I was like, when Charity wound up losing use of her legs, I was like, I have chronic pain, I have to use mobility devices. Like, sometimes I use a rollator, sometimes I have to use an ECV, sometimes I have a cane, sometimes I'm fine. That's why I was like, hell yeah. Like, I went and I looked up Mustang Art's battle wheelchair, and I was like, hey, like, let's incorporate these things. When it's things that are created by the people who are a part of those lived experiences and have those identities, that's when it's really cool to bring it in. If it's something that culturally we don't necessarily understand, or like, learn as much about it and educate yourself, absolutely, but rely on the creations of those other people to help inform how you're going to move forward in it, is the way that I like to approach it.
And I think one thing that we should probably endeavor to do for any of our games, and probably we should brainstorm on it together off stream, is come up with an appendix N that we can put at the end of our streams and put things like that on there. Like, hey, these are resources that if you find what we do interesting, that this is where we take items from. This is where you have creators out there, across any spectrum and all spectrums, who are offering quality content where we're learning and taking from in order to do the best representation. Yes. I know, like, I've had that conversation before, actually in a very shockingly healthy fashion, because I was really worried when it started, because I can't remember where I was. Oh, I was playing an orc who wore like a chainmail mask, and one of the people we were playing with, like, does that feel like cultural appropriation? I was like, well, it kind of feels like Stranger in a Strange Land is the trope, but I definitely can see how that, like, oh man, am I doing this? And we had to have this long conversation about it, and at the end, we came to the conclusion, oh no, you're not really doing appropriation, but because it was also like, here's an orc raised by a father who is human, orc mom's an orc, so I'm also not dipping into the, like, I'm a savage, I am that noble savage. Instead, it was like, oh, I'm this guy that I spend time with mom and dad. Is like they have split time. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Dad is like very much into like here are like the rules we follow, and mom's like more in the like here's the spiritual realm or the spiritual elements of your life. Like the
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily Grumish isn't my main god in the pantheon that I worship, although I recognize Grumish as one as the deity. But I had to have that conversation for someone of BIPOC origin to say like, can you see how this could steer in that direction very very quickly if you're not aware of those potential pitfalls you can stick your foot in real quickly.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of the I kind of go by the same and I acknowledge that like I am further along in some of this journey than some folks, right? Like we're all at a different place in our journey and understanding and moving through and like asking these questions. If something triggers a gut instinct in me to like even question it for a second, I'm not going to put it in. Like I trust my gut. If it's one of those things where I'm like, well, like when we this is a whole part of Storm Song we haven't really explored, and I don't know that we will unless I decide to reboot the game down the road, which I might. We'll see. Because I really love that world, and I really, really love telling stories there. Because I
I
put
just
years of work into that.
this is an interesting side component. I have this thing that I got, and it's basically, well, I haven't got it yet. It's a Kickstarter, but it's basically like, hey, here's how to end your world and restart.
Oh, I love it. I Richard played one of Richard's favorite characters is in that game, and I would love to give Richard an opportunity to bring that character back because Kenku are great. I love Kenku.
Damn,
But like,
I love chicken.
Chicken's hilarious. I love chicken. Um, we had it, when I was building Storm Song, I kind of rewrote the Arakocra because the Kenku were in there, but I also had the Arakocra as a major race. And I wanted the Arakocra to be a little more like brutal than they usually are. So like the reason in Storm Song, the reason the Kenku do not have flight is because of the Arakocra. And the Arakocra and the Celestials, or like the Asimar, I should say. Like the Asimar exist in Storm Song, but um they are in a constant war. Like they were the original people of like one of the lands before the Azamar came and the Skylands were created. And so the Arakocra wound up kind of colonizing in a lot of ways. So like it's kind of interesting because the Arakocra are almost like the colonizers. And bless my friend Jordan, who is indigenous. And I learned so much from Jordan about kind of decolonizing my own perspectives as a person. And I learned so much from her and like resources that she shared with me. I actually like let that kind of inform the way that I built that out. So like I didn't do it in an overt way. It was just kind of like I wrapped up like a whole little side story, and like two of my players were like, Shannon, that was really cool. Like you kind of like you took a little like Trail of Tears kind of informative piece without like cultural appropriation. And like these are BIPOC individuals that are telling me this. And I was like, yes, I did it right. Thank you. But it's because I let that perspective of someone who like lives in that world, like I let them inform the way that I narrate and the way that I tell my stories. Like I'm a firm believer in like we need to invite people that like it shouldn't be their job to educate us, right? Like I'm not going to go to my BIPOC friends and be like, tell me why this is a bad thing. Please don't do that. Like if you have like people of color playing in your groups, like folks watching this, please don't go to them and be like, educate me on why this is a bad thing, because it's not their job. Google
I
is a thing.
so and tell me if this is wrong.
Yeah.
Going to those folks and saying, what is the best practice for this? What do you think as far as if I'm going to do this, how do I do it right? Because I don't want to tear it apart. I just want to do it in a way that is Correct.
I
Can you
think
give me ideas, or if you're playing in a game and you see it going the wrong way, can you say, hey, no, do not, no. Let's think about this, because I think also, as someone who believes that, I mean, conversations like this, or any conversation I get to have with, whether it's the chat or Matt, whenever we
yeah,
do any
yeah.
prep, I think like a room full of brains is better than one brain, because perspective, information, and the ability to shape concepts as a group is always going to be way cooler in the end. Like, I again, this chat, yourself, anybody else I have a conversation with about games, who is like,
Mhm.
at any point in that conversation is like, that's cool, but have you thought about this? I go, oh God, no, I haven't. That's way better than what I was doing.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I can only speak to like my own experience and kind of my own journey, both as um like somebody who's certified in like intercultural development.
Is collaboration
Yes.
asking too much, I guess? Because I
It
that's always
depends.
feel like that's the line I don't want to cross, is like going to somebody and say, I'm more asking for collaboration than I'm asking for like education. But at the
But
same
that's the
time, is
problem.
that the same thing? If
It
I'm
kind
doing the
of
same
is.
thing under a different name, then I'm still doing the thing that isn't right.
It kind of is. And I get where you're
Okay.
coming from because like you're kind of like compartmentalizing them as different things.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think a lot of people do because like they do go hand in hand. I think the thing to remember is like no matter what we're doing is as DMs, as creators, like in this, it doesn't matter what you're doing. Like you could be writing a comic book because like Richard and I used to work in comics too. So like whether you're like writing a comic or you're writing a novel or you're building a D&D campaign or you're building a character backstory, whatever that looks like, those resources are out there. Like they are out there. You can find them. Does it take work? Yeah. Does it suck to have to do more work? Yeah, especially when you're like me and you're like, oh my god, it's 2 hours before game. Shit, I got to write things out. I'm real bad about that. But it always ends up fun because I kind of let my characters drive. But like
Yeah.
the other thing is like, is it good to ask for collaboration? Yes. It is not good to assume collaboration because here's the thing, like let's take my queerness as an example, right? I'm one of those people because of my muggle gig and because of like my lived experiences, I am almost always happy to spend the emotional labor to educate or inform someone's opinion if they ask it, right? Not everybody's like that. And I think specifically, and I can only speak for my BIPOC friends and the conversations that we've had and my relationships. Um, I feel like I would never go to them and be like, I sometimes I might say, like, hey, here's the research I'm doing on this piece. Like, this is what I've looked into. If anybody has the spoons to contribute to this conversation, your opinions are totally welcome. But also, I recognize you may not have the emotional bandwidth and the emotional labor to spend on this. So it is absolutely not expected. And like I have to preface it with that. And like there's times when like even as a queer individual or a disabled individual, like I'll pose those questions to like some of my friends who are also queer and disabled. And I'll be like, hey, I want to do this thing. I found this cool resource. Does anybody else have cool resources for people that like want to play disabled characters that like maybe you know about? Like, but you have to do like it sucks. I hate to say the words do the work, but like you have to do the work. Like you really have to do that education piece for yourself first and find those resources. Like I would never expect any of my like friends of color, like I won't go to them, and I have literally like an entire text group of like DEI practitioners that I work with that we all used to work together and we rely on one another for input. So like all of them, I am the only white individual in the group, but I'm also the only disabled and queer person in the group. So like we rely really heavily on one another. I even with them, I will never go to them and be like, hey, what do you guys think of this? Like I will go to them and I'll say, hey, does anybody have the spoons today to like have, or like the emotional bandwidth to have a conversation about something? If not, totally fine. I have resources. I will find resources, but like I'd love your perspective. And like 9 times out of 10, at least one of them will be like, hell yeah. And then we'll have a conversation. But like, I am very mindful and respectful of the fact that like it is not their job to educate me. It's not their job to spend that emotional bandwidth to educate me on those purposes. And especially like when I'm, D&D is it's a form of escapism, like people I think a lot of people, I shouldn't generalize and say everybody, but I think most people want to play D&D because it is fantasy. It's or any RPG really, because like it's in a form of escapism. You want to get away from stuff, and like the last 6 years have been so ungodly hard on so many people, and we've seen so much change, and we've seen so much intensity that like I think I'm more mindful of it now than I used to be. I'm probably even so mindful that like it probably makes my players nuts sometimes. And that's okay. Like I it's fine. But I don't know. I agree with you, like collaboration is really great, but like I'm really mindful about the way that I approach that collaboration. It's never an expectation. And that's why like our session 0 too, like before we even started broadcasting, it was like, hey guys, like let's agree on like these are the things that I don't cross, these are the expectations as a group. Like you set that from the get-go so that like people know. And like I have an open door policy too, so like if anything happens, or someone is like, if I have a player that's like triggered by something in the middle of a session, I'm like, here is the protocol. You message me. I pause the game. I will absolutely address it. We will deal with it like in this way, and then we will move forward. So like I even have like a contingency plan in case I cross a line. So one of my players has a method that is judgment free to call me out on my BS. And I tell them all that. I'm like, if I screw up, call me on it.
Yeah.
I want to do better. I absolutely want to do better. And like, I'm going to screw up. Like we're all going to screw up. Like it's just, that's just part of learning, is like, you're going to mess up, and that's okay. But like when you mess up, you acknowledge it, you own it, and you move through it, and then you do better moving forward.
That's why I try to do the debrief at the end as well,
Mm-hmm.
because I know we've had one debrief during Domains of Dread where yourself and someone else was like, it was like 2 episodes removed. We're like, hey, I know I didn't bring this up afterwards, but like,
Yeah.
this was a lot. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. That I know where that line is, and I would hope I'm a good enough steward of the story to move. That line is still there. Situations like that can occur, but they occur so far off camera that it's more of an illusion that that's happened than being right there.
Yeah.
So I think bad things, horrible things, traumatic things can occur, but you can use them as something that is away from the spotlight. It's the same thing whenever intimate things happen. I like go to black. It's, just like a TV show. You just go, this is happening, the door shuts, and we move to the next scene, which we used like a couple episodes ago, and everybody goes like, oh, and I was like, yeah, I don't need to go into the gory details. This is right. But it's like, as players, you should know that's what happened. So then we move to the next thing. I think Griffin started doing that this last season of Ethersea, where he would like, this is what's going on with some of the NPCs. Your players don't know this, but you know this. Like if we were watching this from an outside perspective, this is something that happened. So as player or as people, you know it, but your characters, they have no idea. And I kind of like that because it makes it feel like there's a lot more going on that's cohesive. But at the same time, again, you got to know where you got to try to find and maintain those lines to make it an enjoyable experience for everybody, because not everyone's lines are the same at all.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's
hard. I'm going to ask you a couple things.
Yeah.
One, as someone who tries to put a lot of diversity into their games, and to show that, relationships and families and everything they're not homogenous. But at the same time, someone who is I would not say there's parts of that in my life, but it's not like it's not the full extent. Is that something that I'm trying to think about the best way to say this? Is it something that should be avoided, or is it something that if you put that in your game as like it's the norm and not the exception, so it's like this is just how life is, period? Is that being done then in a fashion where it's doing disservice, or is it being done in a fashion where it's like that's understandable, but if you start to delve deep into the issues of that, you've crossed the line by far?
I think it kind of depends on the circumstance and that like what specifically that instance is. So like with the drow, my characters like lived through that whole thing in Lovelost Chronicles. So like they're aware of what happened. They know that there's been this whole like factional battle that happened in Manzo Berenzin, and that like the Underdark is different and it's a little bit safer to, you know, tread down there and people visit, blah blah blah. They don't have like a booming tourism yet or anything like that, but that would be a cool bed and breakfast. That's cool.
Visit Manzo Berenzin.
It's just there's little things you can do to like normalize it, that like it doesn't need to be, you know, like this huge overt thing. I think depending on what the thing is, yeah, if you just like normalize it, it's comfortable. Like I think like the way in like Fantasy High, like polyamorous relationships and ethical non-monogamy is just kind of normalized in a piece. And like I'm not gonna assume that like Brennan is like that, but I'm sure he has friends that are like, surprise people, like y'all know someone that's polyam. It's just a thing. Many people are just not very open about it.
Because they can't be.
Yeah, because he can't be for various reasons. Like normalizing things like that, like I think is great. Like I it can be like the simplest of things that like you don't even need to make a big deal. Like we have there's an apothecary that's the last episode of Love Lost, where like they were hanging out at this apothecary and the old man's like trying to sell skincare products to them, and it was like UV protection, and like there was this terrible like Vidal Sassoon like label type thing with like a Dris Stewardson on the front looking beautiful, you know what I mean? Like stuff like that, where it's like, no, it's great UV protectant. Like it was developed by like people in Manzo Berenzin. You should try this. It's going to make you glow. It's going to make your skin beautiful. And UV protection is great. Like who knows better about it than the drow, you know, like little things like that. But like, it's not like I leaned into that and started like leaning into like stereotypes about like hair care products or other things that are like very racially coded, that like people have a lot of misunderstandings and stigmatism about, you know what I mean?
I try to drop things in, like from my perspective, like that we've had NPCs who, you know, are in very healthy, you know, relationships, whether it's polyamorous or whether they're same-sex relationships, whatever they may be. And it's just like, oh, this is so-and-so's significant other. And we just keep on moving. Because I don't, like I said, I don't feel it needs to be a story beat unless the players decide it's a story beat, but it should be like, this is the world. Like in the world, especially I always kind of look at it too, as like, it's a fucking fantasy world. Someone could be married to a goddamn dragon.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
It's that's just the
Donkey could do it. Anybody can.
You know, when it comes to that, I feel like
Manzo Berenzin.
I kind of feel like when it comes to that, it's kind of like, oh, you know what? This is a perfect place to ensure this is the norm. Because there's just so much potential in that. You know, normalize it and ensure that it's understood that it's the norm. Rather than saying, let's put a spotlight on this and how special it is compared to every other thing that you think is normal. When it's like, well, it's just normal. This is just how it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's not like one of those where it's like, oh, look at this normal. Look how normal this is. Look at this normal. Oh my God, it's so normal. Like you don't want to do that. It's just a matter of like, yeah, like this is just how it is. If you want like, you want to go to the apothecary and get like a Band-Aid for your boo-boo, cool. He's got that. He's also got some cool like skincare products that are really great for like different races. He's also got like stuff that's going to make like your scales look really supple. You know, like you just have to like don't make it like a what I call a BFD, like the big fucking deal. just like just make it like a casual thing. And like if something feels like in your gut that like it's wrong, then you're kind of like, okay, let's maybe think about that for a second and pause. But like other than that, like I try to make it really like surface level and not like dig too deep.
So another kind of thing that just popped into my head while we were talking about Storm Song. Is
Yeah.
there any Kirby influence to that? Because the first thing that kind of pops in my mind sometimes when you talk about it is the new gods and the bugs on the surface, and how that's a very Jack Kirby always was messing with class, and the very visual illustration of like these people are up here and they want to remain up here and they want to keep you down there. I mean, if anyone's ever read one of his last works at DC was a Hunger Dogs miniseries, just about the downtrodden on Apocalypse, like, and an uprising, and that like, and it was based upon, you know, he talked about this was based on my perspective as a Jewish person growing up in New York and dealing with
Mm.
racism, and then as someone who fought in the Second World War and dealt with that. I mean, there's also the famous story of someone who was espousing Nazi beliefs out in front of Marvel, and him putting down his pen and paper, telling Stan, "I'll be back in about 6 minutes." Walking downstairs to the street and kicking the shit out of the guy, and then walking back upstairs and going right back to work, because that was just,
It's the most Kirby thing ever.
yeah, Kirby just didn't. That was a big thing, and I think, you know, and probably was for a lot of, if you look about at the history of comic books, that initial very prolific, amazing group of creators, the vast majority were Jewish. And they dealt with a massive amount of discrimination and a work discrimination as far as pay and compensation, just overall. So kind of, you know, that again, the basic classism, do you think that is a part of that kind of world build that you were doing?
You know, I'd love to say that I was intelligent enough to take a cue from Kirby. I probably, maybe like on a subconscious level. The interesting thing about Storm Song and the way that I built it, because Storm Song is actually very heavily influenced by a lot of different Final Fantasy series.
Oh, okay.
That's kind of where a lot of my inspiration from it came. What's interesting about it is it's literally this like idealistic society where like everybody's, even the people that work and live in the baselands are, you know, they live comfortable lives, like they're good, they're happy, there is no poverty, there is no, you know what I mean, like they are absolutely reliant. So like I think of like the continent of Archilia, which is where um it's where all of the mining products come from. It's where the mining industry is. It's where a lot of the agriculture comes from. So it's kind of like what we would consider like blue collar workers, right? But like they're all different races living together harmoniously. Like they make good money because like the financial structure is such that like their trade to go back and forth to the Skylands, because the Skylands obviously can't get access to those things. So the Skylands are actually reliant on the baselands to provide those things. The people in Cadenza don't eat unless, you know, the shipments from Archilia come in, and that's what's really fascinating about it. That doesn't mean that like there's not problems in the world, but like it's not really like a classist thing. Because like honestly, like the Aarakocra and the Azamar are in one of the Skylands, and the Azamar are probably the most tread upon people there, mostly because like their numbers were pretty much wiped out in the wars before they developed the archmagal system and the grid to kind of like keep everything controlled, because the Azamar brought magic to that world, and then people got greedy and decided to try and like take that magic and use it for different gains. And like the Azamar were like a very simple, they lived very simple lives. They were good-hearted people, and they were literally like colonized to death by other people. So now like they live in one of the Skylands, but it's like a very small village on a continent that's like predominantly Aarakocra, who have, you know, kind of taken over their land, and they live in peace and unity. But it's kind of like this, like, hey, you guys should probably like consider giving us back some of this land. And the Aarakocra are like, yeah, but like this is how we make our money. So like, so it is, like I said, it was very heavily informed by friends of mine who are indigenous. So like I wouldn't say like those classist pieces can happen regardless of where it is, but for the most part, that's really the only kind of tumultuous thing that happens there.
And that's kind
Yeah.
of why I used that as the wedge with Ragash when we were talking about it. Was like he's immediately like, okay, well, I'm going to wedge this against these two people because it's
Mhm.
like, oh, well, these people want to gouge you for food, and then well, you're up here, you've got, you know, Anakin, I have this the high ground,
Yeah.
and then you just start to you take that kind of peaceful society and you start to go, well, haves and have nots, look at the haves and have nots.
Yeah.
And I think you can wedge pretty hard, which was like, that was another thing where I was like, God, am I breaking this? Or is this like just me trying to exploit it
No,
to
because
make it a
like
conflict?
fun story, like that's Charity's whole, like in the original Storm Song game that I ran, Charity was the primary NPC, and Charity got this group of people together from all over Storm Song because her teacher, she basically got like, she was this close to getting expelled from Evergreen Academy for being too chaotic. Like she blew up an entire wing of the school. Uh not intentionally. I
These things will
mean,
happen.
yeah, like it's kind of, well, I mean, she knew that was a potential to happen, but like no one was hurt, but like she's a very destructive creature and she will do anything she can because like when Leona was promoted to Archmage, Charity was not allowed access to her best friend anymore. And like that's her best friend. It's the first person she's ever really had feelings for. If we're honest, there's probably some queerness there as well. Like Charity, like she loves Leona, not just his family.
Yeah.
Like she will do anything to protect Leona. So like in her mind, they took the one person that matters to me away. And now that my vision is clear, I can see that like the way that this world runs, it is so unfair to put that on a 10-year-old kid. Like this is abuse. This is toxic. Like, why are we doing this? This has to change. So her whole view in that game was to topple the structure of society so that she could put things back to the way that they were and get her friend back, because she's like, no, we're going against the natural order of things. We're controlling the weather. We're controlling the way that things run. And we're putting the weight of that on children, generation after generation. What the hell's wrong with you people? So she got a bunch of people together and like, you know, she was sent on errand because like she was basically this close to being expelled. So her teacher sent her on like a sabbatical. Like, you have to do a project. You have to like build something. You have to focus on something and you have to do it away from the freaking school for a while because you're kind of making me nuts. And that's what Thaddeus did, because Thaddeus was like her mentor.
I love Thaddeus.
You would hate him in the freaking regular game though. Oh my god, he's actually dead now. I killed him. I
What?
killed him. He
You you
was
you
a
got rid
bad
of
man.
My James Mason voiced.
I did. I'm so sorry.
I liked that character so much.
He's actually a cool character, but he got in a bad way and like made a boo-boo. So like he sends Charity on the sabbatical and Charity's like, okay, I'm see Richard Thaddeus's dick. He is a pompous
Yeah,
jackass, like I'm
I
not
think
gonna lie.
again, I think of James Mason and I was like, oh, that's that dude right
That's so
there.
perfect.
Um,
So like Charity went to go like collect these different items to build something, and she's like, oh, I'm just building it as a school project. And what she was literally building was a kind of generator to take over as the archmage so that it wouldn't require that individual thing. So she was trying to like manipulate magic through science without requiring that human component to keep it balanced, so that like Leona could be free, and then her and Leona could find a way to like get rid of the stone grid together
What
and
are you
live happily
building?
ever after.
I'm building a science bomb.
Yeah, I'm building a science bomb. Literally, that's what it is. And it's hilarious because like
Also,
the crew,
wildly Kirby.
yeah, but that's what's so funny is like totally not something I had considered, and now I'm just like, oh my god, it is. But yeah, so like that's her whole thing. But that's why like she's also kind of bad. And like
Yeah.
but it's
No,
so funny because like only 2 characters in the game ever questioned her motives. And they're like, Charity, you're kind of fucked up, kid. And like everyone else is like, I will protect baby. You stay away. Protect baby. Baby good. And
as baby is biting you on the shoulder as hard as possible.
Charity's like, Charity's like a cat. Like, I love you. You know. But
that's
yeah.
why Charity. That's why. So I like to keep those 2 stories going at the end of every episode, because I think that like Akko to me is just very fun, but also there's this bizarre like cocky idealism.
Yes.
And complete tunnel vision. And I think it's on one side of the spectrum, and then Charity's the same thing on the other side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Like I can't see Akko becoming like a super villain, but Charity, I'm like, oh, Charity would become a super villain.
Totally.
There's Charity to me is like young Victor Von Doom. She's one experiment gone wrong.
Oh my god, that is the highest compliment you've ever paid.
Yeah, because I was thinking Doom is like, because there was this old, I used to have every old issue of What If, and there was a issue where it was like, what if Dr. Doom never had his accident? And he's like wearing the same armor with no mask, and it's golden, and he's like basically good guy Lex Luthor, buddies with Reed Richards, and they're tight friends, and like best man at his wedding. But Doom is like the hero in the Marvel Universe at that point. He is basically Superman.
Yeah.
And I love that idea of, in his mind, in the normal Marvel Universe,
oh no. Ben froze. Is it me or is it him? No, I think it's him. Oh no. Oh no. Chat, are you still there? I'm trying to figure out like who lost connection. Oh, it's him. All right. I'm actually kind of, hopefully he'll return. But like I'm kind of laughing about that because I think they were talking about that specific Doom did him in. Hey Galen, I think they were talking about that specific Doom story arc on an episode of Fresh Ink on G4 a few weeks ago when they were talking about like multiverse stuff and their like phase 5 and 6 review. Yep, there he goes. All right, well, it's just me in my grilled cheese background. That's so interesting. I had never compared the Kirbyism to what I'm doing. That's really fascinating. Now I feel like I need to go back and read a whole bunch of like Kirby era Marvel stuff. That's too funny. That's really fascinating. Oh my gosh. This was going to be like an hour-long episode, and this is what happens when you put Ben and I in the same room. King Ginger and I just ramble. We just talk. But it's been fun. It's been super duper fun. I don't know if he lost connection or what. Let me see. I'm going to assume he probably did. Oh, they just lost power. I got it. I'm going to wrap this episode up. So I apologize that King Ginger, Doom did him in and cut the power apparently because he didn't like that we were talking about him. Thank you for joining us for Prep School. This was a really interesting episode. I've done this a couple times now. This was so fun. I appreciate y'all hanging out. I appreciate you sticking around. If for any reason you guys have any questions, feel free to hit us up. You can always leave comments here at Known World United. Check out all the different things that Known World United has going on. You can catch Down and Outlands every other Monday. Wonderful Planescape game that King Ginger runs. Lovelost Chronicles is the same week on Thursdays. So next week is an off week. The week after we'll have stuff. But they have shows like Bad at Games. They have prep school every Sunday morning, just like this. There's Chaos Scar. I'm going to be doing a one shot next month on a Monday night. So feel free to join in and check us out. Please please subscribe. We appreciate y'all. And I hope that you have a wonderful and delightful rest of your Sunday. Shannon out. Y'all guys have a wonderful rest of your day.